Universal Casualty, Super Q,
los Miami Dolphins y tú, rumbo al Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, rumbo al Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, rumbo al Super Bowl. Son los Dolphins, nuestros Miami Dolphins, el team número 1 en toda la nación. Y son ellos orgullo de Miami y de todos los latinos en la capital del sol. Con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, rumbo al Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, rumbo al Super Bowl. Este año no me hablen de los Redskins, no me hablen de los Chargers, ni de los Dallas Cowboys, porque los Dolphins son número 1 y lo demostrarán al llegar al Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, rumbo al Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, rumbo al Super Bowl. Nuestra línea está mejor que nunca y nuestra defensiva fue siempre la mejor. Y es por eso que yo no tengo duda que los Miami Dolphins ganarán el Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, rumbo al Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, rumbo al Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins me voy para el Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins me voy para el Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins me voy para el Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins me voy para el Super Bowl.
Universal Casualty
Y Super Q, los primeros. Bueno, caballeros, todo el mundo que cante con nosotros. Dame una D, dame una O, dame una L, dame una P, una H, una I, una N, una S. ¿Qué es lo que tenemos? Miami Dolphins. Me voy para el Super Bowl. 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 Me voy para el Super Bowl.
You're listening to the DolphinsTalk.com podcast network.
There's a team Dolphin fans. Football is mighty rough. Winning gets awful tough. We're rooting for the Dolphins. Our mighty, mighty Dolphins. We're rooting for the Dolphins. Our mighty, mighty Dolphins.
Hello, Miami Dolphin fans, and welcome to the Same Old Dolphin Show, sponsored by BetUS, part of the DolphinsTalk.com podcast network. I'm Josh Katzker. With me today and every day is my brother from the exact same mother, Aaron the Brain. Aaron, say hello to the people.
Hello to the people.
Well, Brain, they lost again. And
they certainly did.
So that's five in a row. So that's fun. That's good. And same old Dolphins.
I think it's hard to debate that they're anything other than the same old Dolphins at this point.
I mean, this is just about as brutal as it gets. I mean, and it's like, when you're a fan of the Dolphins, you've sort of grow accustomed to getting your heart broken in new and inventive ways. And so the thing that I said yesterday, after the game, reflecting on it, the game may actually not have been even over yet, but it's like, the thing that is so infuriating about the Dolphins is that even when you expect it, even when you are mentally, physically, emotionally prepared for the letdown that the team is going to deliver, they still find a way to over-deliver. So it's not enough just to crumble. Our quarterback has the second concussion of the season, so we're going to start Teddy Bridgewater. Okay, fine. So this will be the third game this season that the Dolphins have started a different quarterback besides Tua Tagovailoa. Okay, fine. But then you also get it to be the third time in the course of the season that starter also goes out of the game. You have not been able to complete a single game with your backup quarterback starting and finishing. When you're a middle-of-the-road football team, luck ends up playing an outsized role in where your team ends up at the end of the year. Would you say that's a fair statement?
Yeah, I mean, I guess so. The luck is always going to play a factor, but the really good teams mitigate luck.
Right. And that's my point. The teams that are the best teams, the elite teams, not to say that luck doesn't factor in at all, but they have things that they are capable of doing, whether it be the amount of talent on the team, whether it be coaching, whether it be whatever it is. When you were an elite team, when you were a great team, a championship contender, you have a way of canceling out the luck factor. When you are a middle-of-the-road team, that luck factor plays an outsized role in factoring where your team ends up. And we talk about this every year. We talk about there's a handful of teams in the NFL who are in that sort of tier that finish anywhere from 10-7 to 7-10. And all those teams are kind of lumped in together. They're all roughly the same from a talent standpoint. It's just a matter of a bounce of the football goes the right way a certain number of times, and that's the difference between that team being 10-7 and being able to get into the playoffs, and that same team finishing 7-10. Right? It's the way the ball bounces. It's luck playing that outsized role, and that team not having whatever facilities or faculties they need to counter that luck. And that's been the Dolphins this season. It happens to be that they've got one of the toughest schedules in the NFL. It happens to be that they've been dealing with a lot of injuries, and there's just a number of different things that have worked against the Dolphins this year. The timing of the injuries, the NFL deciding that the Dolphins did something wrong with in regards to Tua Tagovailoa and the Buffalo game. So they had an extra eye out on the Dolphins, and then ends up pulling Teddy Bridgewater from the game against the Jets. Whatever. It's luck, right? A certain degree of it is luck, but there's also something else. There's also the fact that the Dolphins, when you think about injuries had to be factored in to this season. You had to consider the fact that great column by Dave Hyde in the Sun Sentinel, talking about how this was all part of the risk factor when you drafted Tua, when you signed Teron Armstead, who you paid significantly less for because of his injury history, right? All of that is baked in. You signed Xavier Howard to a long-term contract. You restructured that contract. You went into all of these agreements. You went out of your way to trade for Bradley Chubb. All of these players with questionable injury status or history, if you will. And again, I'm not a guy that's big into injury prone, but those situations are what they are. You know the risk you are taking with those particular players. And on Sunday, against the New England Patriots, the Miami Dolphins did not have Tua Tagovailoa. They did not have Teron Armstead. They did not have Xavier Howard, and they did not have Bradley Chubb. None of those players were available. Is that luck? Maybe it's luck. But whatever the case may be, is the Dolphins have not been able to counter the amount of bad luck that they've encountered this year. Would anybody? I don't know. But the fact of the matter is, we find ourselves here a year after the Dolphins made significant investments to their roster to fix the offensive line. We'll put that in quotes, to fix the offensive line, to bring in Tyreek Hill, to bring in a new head coach. And the result is the Dolphins are 8-8 and may find themselves on the outside looking in. They might find themselves with a worse record than Brian Flores finished with last season. And they may find themselves on the outside looking in yet again when week 18 is in the books. Now, to be fair, Brain, there is still a possibility that the Dolphins could actually get into the playoff. But to be fair, I mean, listen, it's there. There's a possibility. If the Dolphins beat the Jets, right? The Jets, who are now eliminated from playoff contention because they held up their end of the bargain. They lost to the Seahawks. All the Dolphins needed to do is beat the Patriots, clinch a playoff spot with a week to spare. Didn't do it. So they play the already eliminated Jets. If they beat the Jets and the Patriots lose to the Bills, who will absolutely have something to play for next week. As it stands right now, the Bills are behind in the Monday night game against Cincinnati as we're broadcasting live on Friday night to the I Am a Miami Dolphin Fan Facebook page and the Dolphins Talk YouTube channel. If you're listening to this in podcast form, you already know the results of this game in all likelihood. But regardless of whether Buffalo wins or loses, they will still have a fighting chance at the number 1 overall seed in the AFC. And so all we need is them to beat the Patriots at home in Buffalo. And if they do that, the Dolphins make the playoffs. But of course, Brain, if the Dolphins make the playoffs, it's going to look like this. For those of you listening in podcast form, that was a garbage truck backing up into the waste management facility. That's what it's going to look like if the Dolphins make the playoffs with this particular group of people, with Skylar Thompson or Teddy Bridgewater again at quarterback in week 18. I mean, that's what it's going to be at this point. At least that's how I feel. That's where I am as I'm sitting here. So, Brain, before I turn it over to you, I want to just say this to all the people that are watching us live on the I'm a Miami Dolphin Fan Facebook page and the Dolphins Talk YouTube channel. By the way, go ahead and smash that like button here, if you will, and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you're notified every time we go live. We appreciate that. Thank you, everybody. So go ahead and smash that like button, if you will, real quick. But this is going to be a group therapy session. So we want to hear from you tonight. So if you're watching live, go ahead and put it in the comments, either on YouTube or Facebook. If you're watching after the fact, put it there too, because we want to hear from you. We want to hear how you're feeling. How old are you? How long have you been a fan? Where are you from? Where do you live? And then tell us how you feel about this team right now. We've already gotten a handful of responses in on the Twitter machine. I'll share a couple with you. Here's just one from Keith Hummel. He says, been a fan since 1970, by far most frustrating and disappointing season I can remember. Yes, as a kid, I was a kid when they won those early Super Bowls. After the start, I was expecting so much more, even though I was even keeled and said 9 wins before the start of the season. Hashtag same old Dolphins. So there's one. Then we've got Robbie Digital. He's 41, has been a Dolphin fan for as long as I can remember. Even if they beat the Jets and sneak into the playoffs, I'm not confident this current iteration of the team, injuries, etc., can get past the first round and will get embarrassed. He also includes what's his name? Playoffs.
Oh, Jim Mora Jr. Or
Yeah,
Jim Mora Sr., rather.
Yeah, he's got Jim Mora, a gif of Jim Mora saying playoffs. So we want to hear from you. If you're watching live, go ahead and drop your thoughts into the comments below on YouTube, or the live chat on YouTube and the comments below on Facebook. We want to hear from you and see how you're feeling about all of this. And again, if you haven't done so already, like this video. Follow us on Twitter at Amplify to Rock, at Aaron the Brain. That's at Aaron the Brain, and at Same Old Dolphins. We want to hear from you, and I'll go ahead and I'll tease it right now. We do have a special guest joining us a little bit later in the show, who's going to share what he is feeling about the Miami Dolphins right now as well. So, Brain, I'm going to turn it over to you. How are you feeling?
It's just, I'm exhausted, man. I'm so tired of seeing this team every year just do the same thing, and it doesn't matter what they do in the off season. It doesn't matter what they do in September and October. It's the same end result, and I'm just so tired of it. And it's so predictable. It's just, if it wasn't so predictable, if it wasn't this team, if it wasn't this franchise, it would be unbelievable to have 22 years go by that this team has not won a playoff game. Only 2 playoff appearances in over 20 years. In a league that mandates parity. It's mind-boggling. And it's just exhausting to just go through it. And this year, more than any other year, and there have been some collapses from this franchise. You know, the 92 or 93 year where Marino got hurt early in the year and they were, 9-2 and they lost, the last 5 to miss the playoffs. That was a collapse. The year that they started like 7-1 or 8-1 and were like on the mid-season cover of Sports Illustrated under Jimmy Johnson as being the favorites to win the Super Bowl, and then finishing 9-7. And I think they even won a playoff game. That was a frustrating year. The year that they beat the Raiders to, get into position to have a bye in the first round, only to lose their last 2 games of the season and end up missing the playoffs altogether. And then to go out the following year, bring in Junior Seau, and, everybody was like, this team is out for some kind of vengeance. And for that team to win 10 games, it still missed the playoffs that year. Like, there have been some epic fails from this organization and this franchise in general. But this one really hurts. And I realize that they could make the playoffs. But come on, man. This team is not going to do anything. They're just not. First off, I don't know that they're going to beat the Jets. And they what a fitting end to this season if this team lost at home to a Jets team that's already been eliminated with a chance to make the playoffs. What a fitting end this would be. And at this point, is that even far-fetched? Like, I get that they're going to be favored to win this game, regardless of who's playing quarterback. But is it far-fetched to believe that this team is going to lose to the Jets? They already lost to the Jets with their backup quarterback. They could easily do it again.
I certainly wouldn't put it past them.
And We got to see first off, you got to see what happens in this Buffalo game. Because if Buffalo loses, then one of the storylines is going to be what time is this game on Sunday? And
well, it's been confirmed. It's been confirmed that both the Dolphins and Bills are playing at 1:00 on Sunday.
Okay. So
I will pull up the full Week 18 schedule here.
And Kansas City and Cincinnati are not playing on Saturday?
Kansas City is playing on Saturday against the Raiders, the early game on Saturday.
Well, there you go. If the Bills lose today and the Chiefs win on Saturday, the Bills have nothing to play for.
Yeah, that's true.
That's going to happen. That's absolutely going to happen, and the Patriots are going to win, and the Patriots are going to make the playoffs, and the Dolphins will probably beat the Jets, and it will be meaningless.
Well, here's what I can tell you: if the Bengals win this game tonight, given that the Ravens lost on Sunday night, if the Bengals win tonight, the Bengals will play in the 1:00 window against the Ravens.
So
next week. And that matters because the Bengals and Bills will both be sitting there with matching records. And it's a matter of who's going to be the 2 seed.
Nobody cares about the 2 seed because only the 1 seed gets a bye.
Well, it's a matter of choosing your opponent.
Well, and I don't even think it matters who your opponent is because when you're that good and you're battling to make it to the Super Bowl, you don't care who your opponent's going to be in the first round. You're really playing for the home game in the second round is what you're playing for. But neither of those teams is going to go into that game on Sunday fighting tooth and nail and putting up their best game plan and playing all their key players for a potential home game in the second round. You know, they're not going to risk injury unless they've got something legit to play for, which is the bye and home field advantage throughout.
Yeah. I'll also
the 2
this.
seed is virtually meaningless.
I'll also say that I'm not entirely convinced that Buffalo's backups wouldn't still beat the Patriots.
The Patriots are a bad football team, but their defense is legit and they're well coached. And they'll find a way to win that game. At any rate, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. If the Dolphins make the playoffs, if they don't make the playoffs, they're still going to be the same old Dolphins. They're not winning a playoff game. They're not winning the Super Bowl. It's a moot point. It doesn't matter. And it's just super frustrating.
And that's where we are. And that's what this is. That's what all the frustration is about, is that we're here again. And I'll say there's a lot of blame to go around. I think we've said that before. If you're one of those people who wants to blame the quarterback for not being available, you know, and missing at this point 2.5 games, 3.5 games, potentially maybe 4.5 games, may have missed a quarter of the games this season. That argument is there and it's valid. If you are, so there's blame there.
It's not about blaming. It's about the reality of the situation.
Sure. I'm just saying there's blame to go around there. There's blame on I think most of the blame, let's be honest, it probably starts with the general manager at some point. Or you could say the owner, and I would not argue against it because I think the owner is the biggest clown of all. But let's talk about this general manager who's been with the team since 2000. How many times have the Dolphins gone to the playoffs and won a game in the playoffs since Chris Greer has been with the team in 2000?
Was he the GM when they won the playoffs?
He wasn't the GM, but he's been involved. He was
a scout. Yeah.
He's been with the franchise since 2000. They won a playoff game in 2001. It's the last time they won a playoff game. The Dolphins' last playoff win is old enough to drink. Okay? The Chris Greer has been the GM since 2016. The Dolphins have been to the playoffs once in that time, and they were pretty roundly beaten by the Pittsburgh Steelers.
And that's what's going to happen this year if the
And if they make the playoffs
into
again,
the playoffs.
it's likely that that's what we're looking at. The Dolphins are looking at having to travel to more than likely Kansas City or Buffalo in the first round. And I know the Dolphins played Buffalo tight. And yeah, there's a redemption story in there to be written for the Dolphins to go into Buffalo in the postseason and get a win somehow. But let's be honest. I don't see it happening. I don't have faith that that's something that the Dolphins are going to be able to do based on the way things are going at this point. I don't see them going into the postseason and winning that game. So, I mean, it's just this team is falling apart yet again. They always find a way to over-deliver. They pull you back in. It is literally that scene from The Godfather 3 where Michael Corleone is in the kitchen and he says, just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in. And that's what they do. That's what they do. Just when you thought they couldn't hurt you anymore, they find a way to make you believe. They go 8-3. The offense looks incredible. And then, you know, it's something else that I want to mix in there. And I'm not a blame Tua guy. I'm not a Tua is a terrible quarterback guy. I'm not that guy. But there is going to be a segment of the population who is going to try to have you believe that this Dolphins swoon at the end of the season had nothing to do with Tua because he wasn't there for the last game or maybe the last 2 games of it. But, brother, let me tell you, he was terrible against San Francisco. He wasn't great against the Chargers, and he was god-awful in the second half against Green Bay, even if he was playing with a concussion. And if he was playing with a concussion and playing that badly, that's on him too.
Oh, it's a no-win situation.
I know it's a no-win situation, but I'm just saying.
Situation. Like, if he benches himself, he's getting clobbered no matter what. If he benches himself and the Dolphins lose, you're blaming him for benching himself and you're saying that's the reason he loses. If he benches himself and Teddy Bridgewater comes in and the Dolphins win,
we've lost the brain. We've somehow lost the brain. He's gone. He's dropped. We'll get him back here in just a minute. But he's going on a rant about, looks like he's on his way back. He's back. Brain, we lost you for a second.
Yeah, I don't know what happened there, but it was a no-win situation. If Tua benches himself in the second half of the Green Bay game and the Dolphins lose, then the fan base is blaming Tua for benching himself and they're calling him soft. If Tua benches himself and the Dolphins win, then the fan base is not only calling Tua soft, but now they're saying that the Dolphins have a better chance of winning with Teddy Bridgewater or Skylar Thompson.
Well, we got a comment from MC. It's on the coach too. He should have realized, and I think that's right. There's a lot of this that is on the coach. A lot of the mistakes, a lot of the sloppiness, a lot of that stuff this season is on Coach Mike McDaniel. And I like Coach McDaniel, but there are a lot of things. We've talked at length all season long about his short yardage situations, the challenge situation, about his trying to get too cute and how that's going to sometimes bite him in the butt. But one of the other problems is the number of illegal motion, illegal shift, illegal formation, false start penalties. That's discipline stuff. And I understand that it's part of his scheme to have all of that motion, and that's part of the plan. Excuse me. But if that's going to be part of the plan, you need to account for it, and you need to make sure that your team is well drilled and well disciplined so you're not dealing with those kinds of penalties and tripping all over yourself over and over again. There have been a couple of times this season, I can think of the second half of that Green Bay game where there was a big play to Jalen Waddle where he ends up going down. Dolphins would have had a 1st and goal situation in the second half of that game, but the play was called back because of an illegal shift and a player not being set. And those are the kinds of things you have to get right. And that's coaching stuff. And you can also look on the defensive side of the ball, and you can say whatever you want. We said at the beginning of the season, you could say a lot of things about Brian Flores, right? You could say a lot of things about him, about how he wasn't a great guy. He had people. He was not a people person. He was, he was a hard ass. He was not being whatever. You can say a number of those things. But at the end of the day, that guy and those three teams that he was the head coach for overachieved every single season. And yeah, part of it was he wasn't on board with the tank and his team overperformed. And maybe that was the first problem. But that guy was a winner and he found ways to win. And we talked about Mike McDaniel, about him being charming and, a guy that you could, really get behind. And he was a guy that you liked and you wanted to see do well. And he helped this team get to an 8-3 start. But since then, since teams have caught on to how to slow down his offense, he has done very little to adjust. I mean, heck, he had a third string quarterback in the game against the Patriots, and he had the quarterback dropping back to pass on 6 of the first 7 snaps. I mean, talk about getting away from your game plan of running the ball. What are you doing? That's panicky Mike McDaniel. Yes, I know he's a first-year head coach, but this is a guy that's been around the game long enough. And he's a guy who we heard Tua talking about in the Green Bay post-game conference that it's not time for this team to blink. Well, Mike McDaniel's been doing a lot of blinking. So there's a lot of blame to go on his shoulders too. So I'm frustrated there as well, Brian.
It's frustrating. And this is something that we saw happening. We saw coming a mile away. People didn't look when you're winning games, these things get glossed over, but we're the show that, we bring things up and we're concerned about things. Even when the Dolphins are winning, we're like, hey, we won the game and that's great, but we should be a little bit concerned about this. We should be a little bit concerned about Mike McDaniel getting cute, at times. We should get concerned about them going away from the running game. We should be concerned about the use of the timeouts, about the penalties,
100%.
About this team being, an undisciplined team, because at the end of the day, it has cost them games. Whether you want to talk about his play calling, whether you want to talk about the penalties, the timeouts, the challenges, the special teams, whether you want to talk about Josh Boyer, all these little things at some point or another have combined to lose the Dolphins football games. And that's why we're at where we're at. Now, to a certain point, he does get some grace because he's a rookie head coach. And you have coaches. No coach as a rookie head coach is a perfect coach. I don't care how long you've been an assistant. And Mike McDaniel has been an assistant for quite some time, but he hasn't even really been a play caller ever until this year. So this was a huge leap. He didn't just go from being, an offensive coordinator, a run game coordinator, to being, play caller. He went to being head coach and play caller. And everybody loves the play design. Everybody loves the X's and O's. Everybody loves the loosey-goosey free atmosphere, or, that he's breeded, and a lot of fun and, a lot of points happening. But what are you missing? You're missing the discipline. You're missing him stepping in and fixing things on the defensive side of the ball, because he's supposed to be the head coach, not just the offensive coordinator. But what I'm reminded of is, one, you came into a season where you were saying we're opening the winning window, and you're doing so with a rookie head coach. That's one decision. You also decided, no matter who the coach was, they were going to need to keep the defensive staff together, keep the defensive players, keep the defensive scheme together. So it's not like they exactly empowered Mike McDaniel to go out there and do a bunch of tinkering on the defensive side of the ball. Now, granted, at some point, if Mike McDaniel, as the head coach, wants to go out there and make some changes to the defensive hierarchy, like Brian Flores did, regardless of who was calling the plays on the defensive side of the ball when that change was made last season, there was a change that was made, and Mike McDaniel did not make that type of change. Maybe because he didn't feel empowered to do so. Maybe because he, wasn't assertive enough to assert himself into that position. But the Dolphins didn't exactly empower him to do so. Who made all those decisions? Chris Grier, the same guy that's been here for 20 years, the 20 years of the most futile Dolphins football that we've seen in any generation. He's been here through it all. And the team just can't seem to get out of the muck. So, and then, we talk about, well, they go out and they get this free agent and this free agent, and they're making this trade and this trade. Well, you know what would be nice? If instead of just having one good draft class and then deciding that we're going to build the rest of the team through free agency, if the guy that's been the GM for 6 years and has had his hand and was the head of college scouting before that and was basically in charge of the draft before that, actually drafted well habitually so that we didn't need to go out and trade a bunch of draft picks. So we didn't need to go out and sign a bunch of free agents to fix the offensive line. And then maybe we'd be in a position where we'd be a little bit more deep and we wouldn't feel so desperate to win this year, even though obviously every year you want to win. And when you get in that winning window, you got to go for it. But maybe your window wouldn't be so short if you weren't constantly plugging up holes on the boat, which they've been consistently doing as long as Chris Grier has been here.
Yeah, it is. It's a very fair point, and it's been a very frustrating thing. And it's something that I think he has found a way to survive through regime change. He's been able to find a way to stay afloat. And he's still there. How much longer? I don't know, but it feels like maybe his seat is getting a little bit hotter. But we actually have somebody now who is going to join us to give us his thoughts on this situation. He's somebody that, if you are a listener of the DolphinsTalk.com podcast network, he's somebody that you're very familiar with because he does a show week in, week out, although he's been very, very busy of late, but he does a show regularly for Dolphins Talk. He is a very, very smart man, a very, very accomplished man. He's been a very busy man for the past few years, but he's still been able to find time to sweat it out with the Miami Dolphins, just like all of us. And he is joining us now on this episode of the Same Old Dolphin Show. We've been trying to get him on the show for a long time, but now he's got a little bit more time on his hands so he can join us. So please give a warm welcome to our good friend finally joining us here on the show, Kevin Dern. Kevin, how are you?
Hey guys, I'm good. How are you?
Pretty good. I mean, all things considered.
Yeah, all things considered, of course.
given the state of affairs, I think we're doing as best as we could do. So I take it you heard most of Aaron's rant just there on Chris Grier, and
I caught a good portion of it.
Yeah, I mean, we're kind of just, this show has been like an opportunity. I'm trying to make it, normally this would be the Patriots recap, and we'd be talking about the Patriots game, and we've referenced it here and there at a couple of points, but largely this has been kind of a group therapy session, not just for us on the show, but for the listeners as well. And we've got a whole bunch of people commenting on Twitter and Facebook and YouTube, giving us their thoughts. And if you haven't done that yet, folks, please do so now. Go ahead and drop it in the comments. And again, reminder to like this video on YouTube. We appreciate it. But wanted to give you an opportunity to do a little venting of your own. I don't know if you've recorded a Dolphins Talk Weekly yet for this week, if that's something that's on your agenda, but to give you an opportunity to sort of clear your head a little bit in terms of what's on your mind in terms of what has been just an incredibly frustrating season again as a Miami Dolphin fan.
Sure. Well, honestly, I really haven't had time to kind of just ruminate about the game. Right after it ended, I would say probably within 15 minutes, I was outside with my wife trying to finish sealing the kiddos swing set. So
nice.
That took up a little bit of time, and then took our oldest daughter to the Cincinnati Museum Center today. So if you've ever seen the Justice League comics, that building, their headquarters, is based off the Cincinnati Union Terminal, which is now the Museum Center.
Oh,
So
sweet.
kind of a weird day. I actually had the day off work, so I'm able to join the show. So thanks for having me on. But
Of course, our pleasure.
as far as thoughts about the game, you know, going into it knowing they weren't going to have Tua, I didn't really feel good about coming away with a win, to be honest. I mean, look at what Belichick's done to backup quarterbacks and rookies throughout his history. I didn't think it would be that close, which just in my mind makes it worse. And then I guess kind of the big thing for me kind of really set in after they lost the Green Bay game. I was able to watch the first half of that live, had to travel, knew they had lost, but didn't see the second half until I guess that was probably really late Christmas evening. And that kind of helped take the sting out of it. But I'm old enough to remember the 1993 season. I used to have probably like 10 or so games from that year on VHS tape. I don't know where they are now.
Oh, man.
But I remember that collapse. And this feels worse, mostly because Marino, I think, only played the first 5 games and was out. So they were only like 4-1. They still got to 9-2. I think what sours it most for me is that, and we kind of talked about this when I came on the live watch during the Chargers game, is that we had Tua for the first 4 losses of this streak. And he played his worst ball, I would argue, in 3 of those 4 games. You know, the Buffalo game played pretty well. You know, I think it's one of those things where if you look clearly enough, there's a lot of clarity to be had. I don't know that Stephen Ross is the guy that's going to do that. You know, I used to joke all the time with Travis Wingfield when we had the podcast. We were both big fans of Breaking Bad, and there's the episode in the final season, the half measure and full measure. And Stephen Ross has always been a half measure guy.
Mm.
And I feel like if he's ever going to do the full measure, you know, unless they somehow backdoor their way in and win a playoff game, I feel like this is the year. Because if you wind the clock back a year ago, like Mike McDaniel wasn't their first choice. You know, they had flirted with Sean Payton. I believe they had talked to Brian Daboll, and he turned them down. I don't remember the specific reasoning. It may have been because of the D coordinator thing, which is interesting. We can talk about that a little bit if you want. I do have some insight on that. So yeah, I mean, I think McDaniel was only on the radar because Brian Flores requested to interview him as an offensive coordinator candidate the year before. And that felt like, okay, we're running out of choices. And correct me if I'm wrong, but weren't the final 2 candidates McDaniel and Kellen Moore, I believe, from the Dallas Cowboys offensive coordinator? That doesn't strike me as like it being a particularly attractive job as viewed on the market. And probably for some of the reasons that Aaron hit on, at least that I heard while I was backstage, talking about, you know, the defensive coordinator being forced on Mike McDaniel. I'll just spill the beans. I went to Indy and met up with a couple people during the combine and talked to, he is now a current NFL defensive coordinator of another team. He was we'll call it free agent at the time. Or I guess he wasn't a free agent. He had been hired. But verbatim told me, I would love to coach the Dolphins. They have a gold mine of talent on defense. You know, I won't say his name just because he has a job right now. But I thought that was very interesting, you know, that there were still names out there that were attracted to it. To me, my feeling is all just kind of, I don't really care about the Jets game on Sunday. You know, if they win, they win. If they lose, I expect that. To me, it's more about what happens on Black Monday.
Yeah.
And I remember last year just being completely shocked when they announced that Flores was gone. I can remember, I think it was when they fired Gase. And I remember I had the day off work. I think that might have coincided with New Year's Day, maybe, or New Year's Eve. I don't remember. But whatever the Black Monday was that year, I remember when they fired Gase, I was like hooked in all day because, you know, everyone had been waiting for it. This year, I kind of get the vibe that if they do fire McDaniel, there's going to be a lot of unhappy Dolphins fans. And
Yep.
I don't know. I don't think he's as good as people think he is. I think he's more offensive coordinator than anything. I think there's a lot of big picture stuff he doesn't have his thumb on or, correctly. From what I know, and this will piss a lot of people off because they all hate Brian Flores, I would just say, comparatively speaking, I feel like Brian Flores had a better grasp on the big picture, day-to-day operations of how to run a team, both on the field and from the front office standpoint. Now, you can ding him for not developing an offensive staff to his development, not playing nice in the sandbox with others. But I think those are areas where Mike McDaniel needs to grow. And if you're taking a job where you're handcuffed to a D coordinator you don't know, that kind of says something about you, doesn't it? So that's where I'm at with it. I'm more interested to see what happens after this Jets game. If they somehow get a playoff spot, I'll be entertained for a day.
Sure.
But I hope it doesn't lead to kicking the can down the road. And, as it relates to Tua, nice kid. He's had a rough career, but this feels like kind of how we were with Ryan Tannehill, going into 2015, I think is when they extended him. Like, there's enough there to be intrigued, but there's never been enough to say definitively he's the guy. And I know a lot of Dolphins fans out there would argue me on that point, and that's fine. But the fact of the matter is, when we needed to play the best ball of the season, he's come up short 3 years in a row, 3 seasons in a row. And now with the concussions on top of it, you don't have any trade value. I don't know if he was on the open market, what team would sign him to anything other than maybe like a backup deal. We're going to center around this guy. I don't know. I feel like a lot of changes need to happen.
Yeah, it seems like it's a really tough situation for the Dolphins in regards to the quarterback, just mainly because they don't really have the resources to go like they don't really have the resources to go out and get anybody else in immediately. I think when they sort of made the decision to go in on him and bring in all that support, he was going to be the guy this season and he's going to be the guy next season. And I think at this point, the best decision, at least for the Dolphins, would be that you don't exercise that 5th-year option and let's bring him in next year and let's just see how it goes. Or you exercise the 5th-year option, then you've got that very expensive player. And then after next season is when you can bring in somebody else, whoever that may be, or maybe, he comes in next year and he lights the world on fire. And then, that's the best case scenario. As we've said here, the best case scenario was this guy came in and was lights out and proved that he could be healthy for a full season and was going to be the solution for this team. But that has certainly not been the case. And we find ourselves with, as well as he played this season for a stretch, the fact of the matter is, with the assumption that he's not going to play on Sunday, he will have missed a quarter of the regular season games, which that's a big problem for this player. And let's not forget that the last 4 of the last 5 games he played before getting hurt again were not he was not the same player lighting the world on fire. Yeah, he had a really good game in that game against Buffalo, and that's really great. But it's when the results are as consistently as they have been for this player over the course of 3 years, it's really hard to make those commitments just on their face. But then you add in the injury concern, and it makes it even harder. And that's where the Dolphins find themselves, which is a very same old Dolphins situation, because you don't have to look back very far to find the last time that they were in that situation with a quarterback. And I think, it wasn't the injury concern issue, but it was the up and down nature of the way Ryan Tannehill played. And the Dolphins in that instance ended up giving him a new contract, and they ended up doubling down on that problem, which never really got much better. And so how do you prevent yourself from making the same mistakes again in the future? I don't know, especially not when you've got the same owner. And I know Chris Greer wasn't the GM when the Tannehill deal was made, but he was certainly in the building and he was certainly part of the conversation.
Yeah, that was a Tannenbaum decision, the Tannehill contract, which was an awful contract because you didn't have to make that move at that point. You could have let him go another year, or you could have given him the fifth-year option as a first-round quarterback, and they rushed it and gave him.
If I remember right, wasn't that the same thing he did when they had Mark Sanchez when Tannenbaum was the Jets GM?
I think so.
Because I
think he did it after his second year. After making it to back-to-back AFC title games, backing into the AFC title games, the way the Dolphins are trying to back into the playoffs.
Yeah.
But it's not. I mean, the way you avoid making the same mistake is that you don't have to make a commitment to Tua right now. Like you could go into next year and pay him $8 million. And basically he's on a contract year, or you can give him a fifth-year option and, you still have him cheap next year and you have him relatively cheap.
Thinking, and I'd almost play him like how Washington played Kirk Cousins. You don't commit a big extension to this guy for as long as you can. You fifth-year option him, you give him the tag if you have to. But, I mean, I don't think they should do anything until next year if he's still the guy.
Yeah, I would think that's the way to handle this as well in this situation, just because of all of the uncertainty surrounding it.
Well, the risk that you make with waiting until next year is that you risk having to spend like an extra $15 million on him in the fifth year.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you end up having to franchise tag him in the fifth year. And that's the benefit of making it. The risk of the fifth year option is Baker Mayfield. Is that you give him the fifth year option and he has a bad year next year and you go into an absolutely must win season and you don't feel good about your quarterback. But then you've got enough wiggle room and cap space going into that year that you could probably finagle a couple of things.
And that brings me to another.
It's just a matter of whether you want to go into next year with it being a contract year. And then I worry about so much has been made this year about Tua's psyche and about what he went through with Brian Flores and having the head coach not believe in him. The organization doesn't believe in him. So much was made about Mike McDaniel coming in. And the first thing that he had to do was he had to build Tua's psyche up with the 700 play, highlight reel or whatever. Well, if you don't give him a fifth year option, he goes into next year as a, in a contract year, you've basically told him, we don't believe in you. We're not going to commit to you. So at that point, I think this is the year that you basically make the decision. He's under contract next year. And I think, look, at the end of the day, if he doesn't play another down of football this year, he's easily a top 10 quarterback, arguably a top 5 quarterback in the league this season. Now, there have been quarterbacks that have had top 5 or top 10 seasons, and one season does not a Pro Bowl franchise quarterback make. But considering it's his first year with any semblance of an offense around him, I think you at the very least feel like you've got a solid quarterback. He might not be great. He might not be the quarterback that's going to be carrying you. You certainly are going to need to have a defense and a running game. He's not going to be Patrick Mahomes. He's not going to be Josh Allen, but I think he's good enough. And so I still lean towards giving him the fifth year option. But if you don't want to give him the fifth year option, then at that point I say, okay, well then you go out and you look at the guys that are out there and you can manipulate cap space to bring it. If you believe, I don't believe that Lamar Jackson is necessarily a huge upgrade over Tua, but it would certainly get the running game going.
Well, I want to kind of pause this conversation just for a minute because I know that a lot of people are listening to us as they're also watching the Monday Night Football game, and I just feel like it needs to be acknowledged because I'm watching this and I'm shook. I don't know if anybody else is, if either of you have the game on, but Damar Hamlin is a safety for the Buffalo Bills, and he took a pretty serious hit in this game and then got up from the hit and then was standing up for a few seconds and then collapsed on the field. The players were surrounding him. They brought out officials. They were trying to get him to respond, and he was completely unresponsive. They were doing CPR on the field, and eventually put him into an ambulance, and I'm assuming taking him to a hospital, but they've now temporarily suspended the game. Both teams have gone back to the locker room in Cincinnati. So a pretty serious situation going on there. And obviously, if you're listening to this in podcast form after the fact, you know what has happened afterwards. But as we're sitting here and it's happening live, I just want to say that my thoughts are with Damar Hamlin and obviously with everybody, all of his friends and family, the Buffalo Bills organization. That's a really scary situation. That is, we talk about this. We talk about this because it's fun for us. It's a game that we enjoy. We like to talk about it. We like to react to it. We like to follow our teams. And we have a tendency to discuss and react to the events that happen on a football field or behind the scenes or in the front office or whatever. We respond to it. But there's a certain degree of separation between how those things are happening when we are talking about them and the fact that those are actually real people that are happening. It's this kind of entertainment factor, but the fact of the matter is this is a very real situation. We experienced something very similar to this in that it was a scary situation on the field when Tua had his injury, which also, you know, I think coincidentally happened to be in Cincinnati as well. But I just want to say that my thoughts personally are with Damar Hamlin and everybody in Buffalo in the Bills organization, his friends and family, because it's just, I've never seen anything like that in an NFL situation. I have seen players collapse and have unfortunate things happen to them in other sports. I've never seen it on an NFL field. I know it. Anyway, I don't want to speculate anything like that. It's just a very scary situation in Cincinnati. And I think it's a really good time, Kevin, to introduce the Kevin Dern whiskey segment, because I think, I think we all need a drink right now, just in reaction to this Dolphins season. But I think the way things are unfolding in Cincinnati, I think it's a good time to maybe send some good energy out into the world for Damar Hamlin as well. So, Kevin, take it away. What do you got for us? What are you drinking this evening?
So
no pressure, nothing to follow up or anything.
Yeah. So last Friday, my brother-in-law and I were off work and we found a new liquor store to go to. So went there looking for something else completely and stumbled across this. I've never had it. It is called Smokehead by Ian McLeod Distillers.
Okay.
I believe they're based out of Glasgow or Edinburgh, but they say this is an Isle Scotch. And if you've listened to me in my podcast, you know that I love Isle Scotches, especially, the Kildalton ones, Ardbeg, Lagavulin, Lafroig. I had high hopes, and then I remembered, didn't Everton have like a midfielder named Ian McLeod who was Scottish a while back?
That sounds about right.
I don't think it's the same guy, but that's what I thought of. I was like, oh, okay, I'll give this a try. So I don't know if you can see, haven't opened the bottle at all. So this will be.
Oh, this is brand new.
This is brand spanking new. So. Yeah, it's pretty heavily peated. It's not quite an Ardbeg level, but it's going to be up there, I think. So we got our brand new glass. There we go.
This is good stuff.
Yeah, so we'll try it. It's not as heavily peated as it smells. I was a little surprised by that. I don't know. I don't know about that one. It's got a weird kind of aftertaste to it. Not much like spice to it at all, which is a little different. You don't get the brininess of like Lafroig and Lagavulin and Ardbeg, which is a little
Right.
different. I really enjoy that. If you've ever had the Port Charlotte heavily peated, I think it compares kind of to that. I don't know. I'll give it a 3 out of 5 star.
Okay, that's an acceptable
Interesting.
rating. That's
Maybe-
right
maybe
middle of the road.
That'll
So
grow on me.
Very, very Miami Dolphins.
Yeah.
yeah,
Scotch.
right in the middle
We'll
of the
see.
road.
So-
It's interesting that was what you had tonight, because I've got a bottle. I figure everybody have a drink tonight. So I'm drinking. This is from a distillery called Nevada H&C Distilling Company, and it's a small batch bourbon whiskey, also with the word smoke in the title. This is Smoke Wagon small batch bourbon, and I love it. It's a very high potent. I think it's like. Yeah, it's like 100 proof. So it's a pretty strong bourbon, but it's got notes of oak, and then like hints of like it's almost like apricot in it with the bourbon. So I'm going to pour it here, and because we're doing this on the show, I'm not drinking it out of a proper rocks glass. I normally would drink it neat, but since this season has been anything but neat, I'm drinking it on the rocks tonight because it's been a rocky season. So my vintage Dolphins glass. So cheers to everybody. Here's some Smoke Wagon. Oh yeah. It's good stuff. It's good stuff. I'm much more of a bourbon than a Scotch guy myself, and this is a particularly good one. Brain, what are you drinking tonight?
So as far as drinks are concerned, I've got some coffee and I've got some water, but I wanted to break out something a little bit special for the occasion. So I told myself that I wasn't going to drink alcohol, and frankly, my supply was pretty barren when you sprung this segment on me. So I said, well, let me improvise a little bit. You went with smoke. So you both had smoke in the title. I'm not necessarily going to smoke this, but what I have here is a 25 milligram CBD and 5 milligram THC gummy with definite notes of tangerine. And you need this to get through what has been the most painful collapse in Dolphins history. So cheers, guys.
Yeah, salute to you with your gummy. We love it. I just wanted to before we sort of wrap up here, because we've gone a little long, but I want to share some thoughts that we got from some of the folks that were watching live. I didn't want to do a traditional pulse check because this is not a one word situation to describe how folks are feeling. So let me just share what we've got. Some things here. This first comment comes to us from Facebook. Oscar D. Quinones says, been a fan since 81. I'm 47 now. It has been mediocrity for a generation post the Marino era. Different cast of characters, same results with a clueless, dumbass owner. This organization will go nowhere as long as Ross is in charge. Followed by Greg Cover, who says, 60 years old, been a fan for 50 years. I've been numb to the perennial late season collapse for 30 years. Tracy Hutchins, like I said with the Godfather 3 reference, feels ashamed for being roped in again. Luis Madrid says, 30 years old, my whole life he's been a fan. I think we're close, very close. Just need a solid, strong quarterback and better defense. I like Tua, but he can't take hits. Clearly, hashtag curse of Shula, I think it's supposed to say. It's spelt incorrectly, but pretty good. Victor Lozano, been a fan from South Texas since 1984, and I feel exhausted, tired, hurt, and fooled by this team. Still a Finn fan. William Hottinson, I'm 58. I live in New Jersey, and I've been a fan since 71. I still have hope that we can right the ship, but the last 5 weeks have been extremely frustrating. Are we going to have all of these guys out this week too? I know Tua's out, but man, we need those other guys out there. Can we run some of the same stuff Tua was running with Skylar or Teddy? Our offense looked extremely vanilla, easy to defend. They have two of the fastest and toughest receivers in the game, and Skylar wasn't, and then we run out of room. But yeah, I mean, I agree with much of that, although part of the reason is the offense doesn't work with those other quarterbacks is they don't have that ability, that quick decision-making ability that Tua has, and that ability to get off of, to get rid of the ball. I mean, you could say that's a positive and a negative, I guess. But finally, from Dennis William Shaw, I've been a Dolphin fan since 1966, living and working for the Coast Guard in Miami. My 3 sons and their kids are avid fans, yet haven't seen a Super Bowl or hardly any playoff success in their lives. Our family motto is wait till next year. I want the Fins to win for my kids and my grandkids. I'm right there with you, Dennis, 100%. We got some tweets in here as well. Dylan Hussey says, been a fan for 20 years. It's probably the most deflating losing streak, and there have been plenty. When it comes to quarterback, Tua cannot be the guy if he can't be on the field. We may need to make some moves in the off season. From Mo Garza, I have trust issues with this team, and this is exactly the reason. I've been a fan for more than 20 years. They always figure out a way to ruin my Sundays. Yeah, I get that. Will K, I've been a fan my whole life, 33 years. What's happening to the team is honestly nothing new to me. New regime, same results. I feel like the team is cursed, and we can get into the Tequesta curse again. We talked about the curse of Tequesta in the last episode, but I think here's the way that I kind of want to wrap this episode up, and I'll get your guys' thoughts on this as well. But we're called the same old Dolphin show, but there's no joy in this. We don't like that they're the same old Dolphins. And the fact is they might still be the same old Dolphins, but we're still here. And I think you hear a lot of that from a lot of the comments that we've received. We've been abused. We've been beaten down by this team year after year. But players may come and go. Coaches may come and go. God willing, general managers will come and go. Owners may come and go. But as fans of the team, we're here no matter what. I'm not going anywhere. As much as it pains me to say it, as much as I feel like an idiot for sitting here and getting duped into believing year after year, I'll always come back to this team. Because at the end of the day, it's in my blood, and I can't help myself. So I'll say this, and I put a thread out on Twitter that was something that was similar. I'm also a lifelong Chicago Cubs fan, in addition to being a Miami Dolphin fan. And the Chicago Cubs were a team that abused my heart for a really, really, really long time. But unlike the Dolphins, the Cubs abused my heart for a really long time by just being abjectly terrible. Like being bad, a bad baseball team for a long time. And there were moments where they would come in and they'd be a little bit more competitive. But for the most part, they were just really, really bad. And every time it seemed like maybe they were on the right track, it would all fall apart, which is a very familiar refrain, I think, to Dolphin fans. But one day, there was a change in the front office. And slowly but surely, the team began to improve. And they started to win. And there was a young core of talented players. And suddenly you thought, wait a minute. Maybe, just maybe, there is something here. And then in 2016, magic happened. And the Chicago Cubs won the World Series. For the first time in 108 years, the Cubs won the World Series. And the Dolphins have been a franchise for, half of that time. And relatively speaking, have had a lot more success in recently, right? I mean, 72, 73. Yeah. Okay. It's 50 years ago now, but compared to 108, much more recent. But at any rate, success will come. You just got to keep believing. You just got to stick with it. Even when your brain tells you otherwise, you got to stick with it. And one day that championship will come. At least that's my 2 cents. Kevin, you have any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I'll piggyback off of that. And this is something I'm reminded of constantly. So for those that don't know or don't listen to my show, born and raised in Cincinnati, Ohio, basically lived there up until 2016 when I moved to Indiana with my wife. But we are just over the Ohio border, so I can get to downtown Cincinnati in under 30 minutes. I I've seen it happen. You know, the Bengals are a family-owned NFL team. Mike Brown has ceded some of that power to his daughter, Katie Blackburn, and thereby his two granddaughters, whose names escape me at the moment. They've really turned that culture around. And I believe up until last year, they had the longest playoff win drought in the history of the league. 1990 was their last playoff win. They finally exercised that demon last year and made it to the Super Bowl. Came up a couple plays short, obviously. But they've changed that culture. And to me, Stephen Ross is the equivalent of a very rich Mike Brown. I don't think he's ever going to not trip over his own feet when it comes to the Dolphins. I do believe that, I can't remember if it's his daughter or stepdaughter who is now in line to take over the team since Bruce Beal is out of the equation because of the tampering and all of that. So though, I would just point to the Bengals as a franchise that was way worse off than the Dolphins. Like, even as a kid, I can remember the Dolphins going to the playoffs, winning a game, maybe two, getting to the divisional round under Jimmy Johnson, only to get, the crap beat out of them. But it can be done. I don't think the cast of characters that are occupying the seats of general manager, head coach, quarterback, either of the coordinators, are the right guys to get it done. But if we're backing up a little to Aaron's point earlier, I think next year is sort of that inflection point. And I think going into 2024, you have a much easier time salary cap wise of pressing the restart button. So maybe you start changing some of those seats on the bus, as it were, right now, to change the ones that you can, and hope that, maybe with a power succession, things start to improve. Because it can happen. It has happened. When I last saw the Bengals score, they were winning tonight. The culture there is an unbelievable difference. I remember going to a game 2 years ago. There weren't 25,000 fans in that stadium, and it holds 67,000. I was there for the Thursday night game this year when Tua got hurt. That place was wild. Might have been the loudest NFL stadium I've ever been to, and that counts several domed stadiums. So to Josh's point, the culture change can happen. Winning can happen. I just feel like we're in the very bottom of that shift, and it's going to take some more time to get out. But the Dolphins will get out eventually.
We got to hope anyway. Brain, you get the last word.
Oh, boy. This team is testing my patience.
You say that as a Marlins fan. Well, they've won two.
As a Marlins fan, I've seen my team win 2 World Series, and I couldn't be happier. The Marlins have brought me significantly, infinitely more joy than the Miami Dolphins have brought me in my lifetime. In fact, every sports team down here, the college teams, the pro teams, every single team down here has brought me more joy than the Dolphins. Even the Panthers made it to the Stanley Cup Finals one year. They got swept, but they made it. I have been a fan of this team. Look, I was born in 84. The first year I really remember following this team was 90, which was the year that I think that was the year where Sammy Smith continuously fumbled inside the 5-yard line. And then we ended up, falling a game out of the division lead to the Bills. And then we ended up having to go to Buffalo in the playoffs. And Jim Kelly beat the Dolphins in like a shootout in the second round of the playoffs. Then the Dolphins a couple years later made it to the AFC title game, only to lose to Buffalo again. That was me catching the bug of Dolphins football. And what it's been progressively worse, because then you get into like the mid 90s, the Jimmy Johnson era, where they really built this, towards the end of Marino, where they got to the, we're going to win with defense. kind of thing, and they started playing the boring football games that we've seen for the last 30 years or 25 years or so. And some years, I guess they felt close, but I don't really, looking back at it, I don't really think that they were ever close. I think that I was just a young fan that learned that they were close and just always believed every year. And all this team has done is year after year, decade after decade, is they've jaded me more and more, and they've crushed my belief that they're close. And frankly, this was the first time since those early 2000s teams under Dave Wanstedt where I actually felt like the Dolphins were close. And here we are at 8-8. And it's like, logically, I can look at it and say, the nucleus of this team is very strong, and they can restructure a couple of things. And if they get luckier from a health aspect next year and they tweak a couple of things, this team absolutely could be very close. But I mean, why would I believe that? Why would I get my hopes up again? What am I doing? And, you know, a lot of people, like, I like to talk about the Housewives here and there. And I legitimately am a fan of watching the Real Housewives. My wife likes the show. She got me into the show. It's essentially like wrestling. You know it's trash, but you watch it. It's like a train wreck. And, people give me a hard time for watching it. I get infinitely more joy out of watching the Real Housewives of Potomac on Sunday than I do of ever watching the Dolphins. Maybe once or twice a year, I get a Dolphins game where I'm like, yeah, that felt really good. Like that Browns game, that in November, that felt really good. What was that? 1 week that the Bills win early in the season. That felt really good. 2 wins in the season. What am I doing as a fan? Like, I'm investing so much time to have 2 days of joy. Like, it really makes me question my life. This team makes me question what I'm doing with my life,
man.
what I'm doing with my weekends.
Unbelievable.
And that said, I'm still going to come back for more. And it makes me hate this freaking team because this is what they're doing to me.
See you Sunday.
I love this team,
Yeah, right.
but I hate this team. And this is where we live as Dolphins fans. And I'm not going to tell you how to fan. You want to be a positive fan and just, I live and die, rah, rah, we're always going to win. I'm going to be out. Do you, man, whatever floats your boat. What I'm saying is this is a painful existence. And this team makes me severely question what I'm doing with my life.
Yeah. Well, there we are. There you have it. There are the thoughts of 3 Dolphin fans who invest time and energy into the team. And like I said before, we devote so much time and so much energy to this team. Everybody on this show does a podcast about this team. We spend outsized amounts of time thinking about this team and what it's doing on the field on Sundays and off the field during the week. And we're about to get into the off season, whether the off season starts Sunday afternoon or whether it starts the following Sunday afternoon, evening, whatever the case may be. We spend so much time thinking about this team because we love it. We don't do this. We don't do a podcast. We don't write about the team because we hate it. It's because we're invested and we love it, and we're not going to stop. We're always cheering for the team to do well. We don't call the show the Same Old Dolphin Show because we want them to be the same old Dolphins. My pinned tweet on my Facebook page is me sharing the pinned tweet from the Same Old Dolphins account and saying there is nothing I want more than this clip to be completely irrelevant. But here we are, cheering for this team. And of course, we're all doom and gloom on the show today because of the direction that things are going. And like I said, there is still, a small chance. I mean, the Dolphins actually have the 3 teams that are still up for the final playoff spot in the AFC at the moment. the Dolphins are actually the team with the best percentage odds to make the playoffs. So, I mean, there's still a better than average chance, I think, that the Dolphins get into the playoffs. But again, there's obviously not a lot of faith. There's not a lot of goodwill left because the Dolphins have burnt all of that on this 5-game losing streak. But then again, the Dolphins were to follow up this 5-game losing streak with another 5-game winning streak, we might all be singing a different tune. I just don't know that I'm holding my breath waiting for that to happen. So all that being said, again, thank you to everybody for listening. Thank you, Kevin, for coming on the show today.
Thanks, guys.
At KevinMD4. I don't know if you've got any written content. I don't know if you've got another episode of Dolphins Talk Weekly coming out soon, but I'm assuming everybody should stay tuned to the Dolphins Talk podcast feed and also dolphinstalk.com. And if there's a new episode dropping, it'll be dropping in there when it'll be in those places as it usually is.
Tomorrow.
Okay, so a midweek episode of Dolphins Talk Weekly. Excellent. Looking forward to that. As always, it's a great show. I appreciate you bringing the whiskey content onto the show this evening. So another cheers to you for that one. I'll take another drink. Delightful. Thank you, Brain, as always, for being on the show. You always have a way of keeping us grounded. And I'm looking forward to our off-season episodes all being about the Real Housewives. We're going to keep that going. And when we finally start the Same Old Dolphins Patreon, it's going to be like exclusive Patreon subscriber episodes about the Brain talking about the Real Housewives.
And RuPaul's Drag Race.
And Drag Race, right,
Yeah,
of course.
That new season starts this weekend.
Yeah.
Excellent. We love it. All right. Well, so that's going to wrap us up for this episode. Thank you again, everybody, for listening. Thank you to everybody for watching. Subscribe to the Dolphins Talk YouTube channel. Subscribe to the podcast and everywhere you get your podcasts. Go to manscaped.com. Use the promo code Dolphins Talk. Go to trueclassic.com. Use the promo code Dolphins Talk. Save yourself some money on great below the waist grooming products and also t-shirts because it's good stuff. So you will not regret it. And thanks as always for listening. And obviously, again, big thoughts going out to Damar Hamlin and everybody in the Buffalo Bills organization as he's going through this scary situation in Cincinnati this evening. It's as always a reminder that it's very important to take care of yourselves and each other. Go Dolphins.
In the words of Lisa Barlow, you don't have to like me. I love myself enough for the both of us.